He fell asleep one afternoon and dreamt he was a butterfly, fluttering, weightless, completely free, not a care in the world, not a thought about philosophy or writing or the complicated politics of ancient China, just a butterfly, doing as it pleased. Then he woke up, and lying there in that strange space between sleep and full waking, he asked himself one of the most unsettling questions in the history of human thought. Was I a man just now dreaming? I was a butterfly, or am I right now a butterfly? Dreaming I am a man. He did not answer the question. He just wrote it down, exactly as it was, unanswered, and moved on. 2,300 years later, philosophers, neuroscientists, and anyone who has ever woken up from a vivid dream are still sitting with it. Zhuangzi is simply the honorific meaning. Master Zhuang was born around 369 BCE in what is now the Henan province of China. During one of the most turbulent periods in Chinese history, the Warring States period. The Warring States period lasted from roughly 475 to 221 BCE, 2.5 centuries during which seven major kingdoms fought continuously for dominance over China, resulting in almost permanent warfare, political instability, and mass suffering for ordinary people. It was also paradoxically one of the greatest periods of intellectual flourishing China ever produced, the era of what historians call the Hundred School of Thoughts, when Confucius, Mencius, Moze, Han Fei, and dozens of other thinkers all competed to answer the same urgent question: how should human beings live, and how should society be organized? Most of those thinkers answered with programs. Confucius said, restore proper social rituals and hierarchies. The legalists said, strong laws and strict punishment. The Moist said, universal love and practical utility. Everyone had a system, a reform, a plan. Zhongzhu looked at all of these systems and laughed, not dismissively, not out of laziness. He laughed the way a person laughs when they suddenly see that the entire argument everyone is having is built on an assumption nobody has bothered to question. He had been briefly a minor government official in the lacquer garden of his home state. He left that position, accounts suggest voluntarily, and spent the rest of his life in poverty, writing, thinking, and apparently fishing a great deal. When the king of Chu, one of the most powerful rulers in China, sent two officials to offer him the position of prime minister, Zhongzhu was sitting on a river bank with a fishing rod. He did not even put the rod down. He told them he had heard there was a sacred tortoise in Chu that had been dead for 3,000 years, and that the king kept it shell in a box, wrapped in cloth on his altar as a sacred object. Then he asked them, do you think that tortoise would rather be dead and honored or alive and dragging its tail in the mud? The official said, alive, dragging its tail in the mud. Zhangzhu said, go away then. I will keep dragging my tail in the mud. The butterfly dream appears near the end of the second chapter of Zhongzhu's text, a book that bears his name and that he largely wrote. Though later editors added to it, it is perhaps the shortest great philosophical statement ever made, barely 100 words in the original Chinese. He dreamed he was a butterfly. He was happy, completely, simply happy, the way butterfly seems to be, without agenda or anxiety. He didn't know in the dream that he was Zhongzhou. He was just a butterfly, being a butterfly. Then he woke up and he did not know, genuinely did not know, whether he was a man who had just dreamt of being a butterfly or a butterfly now dreaming of being a man. He added one final line, almost as a caption. Between Zhongzhu and a butterfly, there must be some distinction. This is called the transformation of things. That's it. No resolution, no answer, just the question hung in the air. and a phrase, the transformation of things, that gestures towards something without explaining it. What was he actually saying? At the most immediate level, he was questioning the reliability of our ordinary waking sense of who we are. The butterfly in the dream was not performing being a butterfly. It simply was one as completely and convincingly as Zhuangzi was a man when awake. If the dream self was that total and that convincing, what makes the waking self more trustworthy? At a deeper level, and this is where Zhuangzi parts company from almost every other philosopher of his era. He was questioning whether the category Zhuangzi and the category butterfly are as fixed and separate as we assume. The transformations of things suggest that identities, forms, and selves are not permanent, bounded things but temporary shapes that the universe moves through on its way somewhere else. This isn't nihilism, a claim that nothing matters. It's closer to the opposite, a suggestion that clinging to any fixed identity, including your own, is what creates suffering, and that letting the transformation happen, instead of resisting it, is closer to what living well actually looks like. The butterfly dream is the most famous moment in Zong's text, but it isn't necessarily the most useful. For that, there's a story from early in the book that most people haven't heard about a cook, an ox, and what mastery actually looks like. Prince Wei's cook was butchering an ox. Every movement he made was perfectly rhythmic. His hand, his shoulder, his foot, his knee, all moving in exact coordination. The sound of his cleaver like music. Prince Wei watched in amazement and asked, "How have you reached this level of skill?" The cook put down his cleaver and explained. When he first started, he saw the whole ox, one large, confusing mass to cut through. After years of practice, he no longer saw the whole ox. He saw its structure, the spaces between joints, the natural pathways through a tissue. Now he said he guided his cleaver through those natural spaces, never forcing, never hacking, finding the path that was already there. He had never had to sharpen his blade in 19 years. This story is doing exactly what the butterfly dream does, but at a more practical level. The cook isn't arguing for effortless laziness. He has worked for years to get here. But the work he did was the work of learning to stop imposing his own force on the material in front of him and start finding the path that the material itself offered. Zhuangzi's word for this is hu wei, often translated as non action or effortless action, not passivity, not doing nothing, but action that flows with the nature of things rather than against it. Action so aligned with the situation that it stops feeling like effort at all. This idea runs through everything Zhuangzi wrote. The most skillful way to live is not the most forceful way, not the most planned way, not the most ambitious way. It's the way that finds the natural paths and follows them, the way that moves like a cook's blade through the spaces that are already there. One of the things that makes Zhuangzi genuinely unusual among philosophers is his treatment of death, not as something to be feared, mourned, or transcended, but as simply the next transformation. When his close friend Weizhu died, Zhuangzi sat down next to the grave and sang, not wept, sang. Someone who saw him was shocked and asked how he could behave this way at the grave of his closest friends. Zhuangzi explained, when Weizhu first died, he had felt grief like anyone would, but then he thought further back to before Weizhu was born, before he had even a body, before there was even a spirit. At some point, he realized there was simply undifferentiated stuff, a chaos without form. Something from that chaos became a spirit. The spirit became a body, the body became a life, and now the life had transformed again. The way spring becomes summer, becomes autumn, becomes winter, and then becomes spring again. To weep and wail at one transformation in a cycle that has no final ending seemed to Zhongzhu like failing to understand where Vizu had actually gone. He had not vanished, he had changed. This same position extended to Zhongzhu's own attitude towards his own death. When he was dying, his disciples began to plan a grand funeral. Zhongzhu asked them to bury him without a coffin, to leave his body on the ground where nature could take it. His disciples were horrified. They said the birds would get him. He said, above ground the crows and kites will get me. Below ground the mole, crickets, and ants will get me. Why favor one group over the other? Zhongzhu wrote during a period of when almost every major Chinese thinker was proposing a program, a way to fix society, reform government, restore order. He proposed none of these things. He questioned whether the frameworks everyone was using to think about fixing society were themselves the problem. This made him, in his own time, a marginal figure. The Confucianists found him destabilizing. The legalists found him useless. Even other Taoists sometimes found him too radical to follow all the way. What he left behind, though, has had one of the longest afterlives of any philosopher in history. The Zhuangzi text directly shaped Chinese Buddhism as it developed Zen Buddhism. In particular, absorbed his love of paradox, his suspicion of fixed answers, and his use of strange stories to jolly students out of habitual thinking. The koan, the Zen technique of giving students an answerable question to sit with, is Zhuangzi's butterfly dream, operationalized as a teaching method. He also anticipated questions that Western philosophy would not seriously engage with for another 2000 years about the reliability of perception, the constructed nature of identity, and whether the categories we use to divide the world are features of reality or just habits of mind. He asked all of this in parables about cooks and butterflies and singing at funerals, which may be why he's still being read 2300 years later by people who find that the more solemn philosophical systems around him have aged less well. The butterfly question doesn't have an answer. That was the point. Zhongzi wasn't trying to solve it. He was trying to show you that sitting comfortably with a question that cannot be solved is itself a kind of wisdom. Most of us spend our lives demanding answers. He's suggesting that the demand itself might be what's getting in the way. If you want the real stories of the thinkers who shaped the world, please subscribe. There's a lot more still to uncover.